Twilight =RK equals Part 3 Tipoca City Camino. It was fitting, I think. The furious storm trying to tear down the city around us was a good reflection of my surging emotions. A massive lightning bolt slammed into a nearby building, lighting up the night. The resulting deafening cracking thunder struck with such a force that for a split second the waterfall like rain was blown away, letting me get a good look at Rancisis and the squad of troopers behind him. I glared at the bastard and smiled coldly. Another lightning bolt struck, this time to the light, and the flash illuminated a robed figure sprinting towards us from behind the Jedi Master. For a moment I wondered what Shaak Ti was going to do. Even drenched, she was easy to recognize in the twilight. However, I found it hard to care. The Jedi did it again, bearing a miracle bow was dead. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't sense her in the Force. Perhaps she was merely critically wounded and her signature was faint. Perhaps I didn't have the strength left to sense someone who wasn't Force sensitive all the way to Coruscant. Or the more likely scenario, my wife wasn't able to survive her chest being crushed. My wife. Murdered. By a Griffin Jedi? Why the griff didn't I join the Confederacy and ensured that they burned down the whole Republic and every single damn Jedi? I glared at Rancisis, who was simply waiting for Shaak Ti's arrival. I glanced at her when she finally made her way to stand beside the older Jedi Master. Ti looked like hell, and not just because the heavy rain had turned her robes into a sodding mess. That sight brought a thin, cruel smile to my face. I could almost taste my vengeance unfolding. Master Rancisis, Master Ti. I greeted with as much false cheer I could muster. It wasn't a lot. Vale. The snake hissed back. His clawed hand went to the hilt of his blade. Your madness ends tonight. Madness? I tasted the word and smirked. The only madman I see are you, Jedi. A coup at this time? Your stunts are worthy of Sith. I taunted. The news came just an hour ago, mere minutes after we arrived in system. Even when I was able to sense what was happening through the Force, I still found the truth hard to believe, the Jedi pulling such a stunt at this juncture. I underestimated the bastards. Under other circumstances what they did would have been something I could respect. Admire even. Despite my precautions, the Chancellor was officially critically wounded, though I knew the truth. The Jedi somehow offed Palpy. I sensed his death after all. At least he was able to activate Order 66, something I should thank him if I ever met his Force ghost. That's why I was down here instead of coordinating an evacuation alongside Holt and Tarkin the Elder. I needed blood to satisfy my thirst for vengeance. Congratulations, Jedi. Your friends murdered Chancellor Palpatine, the most respected and beloved Chancellor in centuries. I chuckled darkly. Well done. Order 66 is in effect. So I offer you my congratulations once again. Today you doomed all the Jedi across the galaxy. What did you do? Ti exclaimed. She could sense I was telling the truth. Well, mostly. What we had to, Rancisis hissed and pulled out his weapon. A blue blade came to life and began sizzling as raindrops fell upon it, only to evaporate before they could touch it. The armored men behind the Jedi spread out and leveled sonic blasters at me. Had to? Yes. I can see it. Mace Windu had no other choice than to murder my wife. I nodded. That might even have been true. Bo wasn't someone to just back off from a challenge. It doesn't matter, Jedi. Your kind robbed me from my wife again. Ti flinched at my words. She knew what I did the last time. Yet another lightning bolt lit up the skies. I could see Ti stealing her resolve. I can't allow you to wreak vengeance upon the Jedi no matter what Windu did, she declared. You know, there's a part of me that hoped you would say something like that. I nodded and let go the hold I've been keeping upon my fury ever since arriving in system. My lightsaber jumped into my open palm and Rancis's soldiers opened fire. Finally my vengeance was at hand. =RK Part 4 Tipoca City Camino. Cold fingers gripped Shaak Ti's spine, and it wasn't because of the icy sheets of rain whipping at her drenched robes. She wasn't a stupid woman by any means. The short conversation between Rancisis and Vale made all the pieces fall together. What did you do? The exclamation fell from her lips before the Jedi Master could help it. When Vale showed her Ashara's death all those months ago, Ti experienced those events through his eyes. She knew that it broke him. Sent him into a murderous fury that never truly went away. Now if Bo-Katan had really been killed at the hands of Jedi, no matter the circumstances, T stared at Vale. While she couldn't see his expression thanks to the helmet he wore, the man felt almost calm in the Force. She knew better. Last time his vengeance had been mostly targeted at those responsible for Ashara's death, even if Vale hadn't really cared if he had to burn whole worlds to get to them. Because he knew his first wife wouldn't like him to eradicate the Jedi Order as a whole because of what happened to her. This time it was different. He had no reason to hold back. No reason to spare any Jedi who wouldn't follow him, perhaps not even then. And that wasn't something Shaak Ti could allow. Not something that she could live with, even if she believed that what the Council apparently did was sheer madness. Going after Vale, fair enough. Launching a coup. Taking out the Chancellor while the war was going this badly? Sheer madness. Yet, she had only Vale's words about what really happened on Coruscant. He didn't feel like he was lying, so he might very well believe his words. They might be the truth as well. However, there were still Jedi dying all over the galaxy after what felt like scores being cut down in a very short period of time. No matter what happened on Coruscant, no matter what some of the Jedi might have done, Shaak Ti simply couldn't support someone who was going to go after every one of her comrades. I can't allow you to wreak vengeance upon the Jedi no matter what Windu did, she declared. You know, there's a part of me that hoped you would say something like that. Shaak Ti knew Vale was smiling when he said those words. Only then he did release the grip he had upon his emotions, and what she felt coming from him almost brought her to her knees. Shaak Ti had never sensed such uncontrolled fury. Bloodlust emanated from Vale like a cloak, and she knew he had to stop him now. No matter what could have been, no matter what either the Jedi or he had done, he had to be stopped. Because the way he felt in the Force, Shaak Ti was sure that right now Vale would cheerfully set the whole galaxy on fire just to enjoy watching it burn. Something in Vale's presence shifted and the Force screamed. Rancisis was barely able to bring his lightsaber up and brace himself when a solid wall of Sith lighting slammed into him. The corrupted energy coming at the Jedi Master was grounded by his blade, yet tendrils somehow whipped around and rend gorges into his armor no matter how much Force energy he pumped into a barrier to protect himself. Beside him Shaak Ti was doing the same with a bit more success. Forks of lighting twisted around her blade only to disappear just before they could touch her flesh. The Cathar commandos who came with the Jedi Master weren't so fortunate. They managed to send few shots at Vale before the lighting storm literally picked them up and sent them flying off the platform. Rancisis felt them die screaming before they hit the water. The onslaught was over as suddenly as it began. The Jedi knew what was going to happen and left himself be submerged into the Force. He felt its power surge through his body, and the dark night suddenly became clear as a day. The Force was on his side. It would guide his actions and ensure that the Sith end today. There was no doubt in Rancisis' mind. It didn't matter how strong Vale was in the dark side. The Force had always been more powerful than a Sith could really grasp. Rancisis knew it, for he was one with the Force. He was its tool to restore the balance in the galaxy. When the blood-red blade came for him, the Jedi Master was ready and at peace. Shaak Ti knew it was coming, yet the sheer ferocity of Vale's attack caught her by surprise. His movements were wild, furious. If it wasn't for the sheer speed and strength behind each blow, the Jedi Master might have dismissed her opponent as a mere monster. Vale was acting sloppy, lost in his rage. Shaak Ti could see openings in his stance, ready to be exploited. This should have been a fight they could win. Perhaps the best chance to stop this insanity the Jedi would ever get. Obviously no one told that to Vale. The dark side surrounded him like an armor. It was a pulsing tumor in the Force that made it almost painful to look at the Sith. As Vale tore at Rancisis, Shaak Ti moved to flank him and end it then and there. It didn't appear that the Sith paid her any attention. His flank was wide open as he slammed his blade in the Jedi Master's guard again and again. Shaak Ti sprinted through the sheets of rain and swung down, aiming to take Vale's arm at the shoulder. The dark side surrounding him grew more solid and gathered around his free hand. T's blade came slashing down, into her eternal shock bounced off a spot of pure darkness that soon became a caricature of a clawed gauntlet that formed around Vale's left hand. The Sith never slowed his onslaught against Rancisis, yet he pointed straight at her. Tears made of the dark side itself manifested above Vale and elongated, becoming black spears that absorbed what little light illuminated the landing path. T didn't need the Force's empathic warning to know she needed to be anywhere but where she stood. The Togruta jumped back, barely avoiding the first spear. It slammed into the metal floor and went through it as if it was made of butter. Just coming to be so close to the damn thing made her feel unclean. Shark T shivered in revulsion and continued to move back as the remaining spears flew her way. It was only thanks to the Force that she somehow succeeded in avoiding the onslaught. Only one spear came close to burying into her side. It ripped through the outer layer of her robe and dissolved the armored fabric. The mere backslash hitting her skin sent needles of ice boring straight into her nerves and made her scream at the touch of the dark side itself. A heartbeat later, Shark T figured out that she wasn't the only one screaming. Rancisis was moving like a lightning, using his serpentine speed and agility to keep up with Vale. They tore through the falling rain, leaving strings of steam before it was washed away. Rancisis was good, very good. Any other opponent would be on the back foot when facing such speed and ability. Vale matched the Jedi Master blow for blow and didn't look like he would be slowing down anytime soon. Shark T had to change that. She ran towards the Sith while pulling more and more of the Force into her body in order to make herself even more powerful. She had to end this now. T was already halfway there when went right into Rancis's face. For a moment it appeared that their lightsabers were pressed between them and they had cut down each other, yet that illusion was proven as a lie in the next heartbeat. Rancisis flew away to slide over the drenched catwalk leading to the landing pad and he was howling in pain. Before Shark T got close enough to jump at Vale, she was sure she saw the Jedi Master's right side cave into a swirl of darkness. The Sith turned to face her in the last possible moment and their blades met for the first time that night. Red and blue blades cut short-lived gaps in the torrential rain as they fought for domination. At that moment, Shark T knew that if Vale was in his right mind, she would already be dead. If he used the skill she knew he possessed instead, raw power and fury, he would have cut her down within moments. Yet he didn't. T fell into a defensive stance and began giving ground, taunting him to come after her, waiting for an opening she could exploit. Eventually Vale's fury got the better of him. He overextended and Shark T was ready for it. He used all the force she could to give her a sudden burst of speed. Vale went for her feint and tried to slam it into her heart. Shark T winced when the blade burned through her robe, grazed her breast making her howl in pain and seared the skin and muscle over a rib. However, the pain didn't slow her down enough. The Jedi's own saber struck true straight at the elbow joint of Vale's sword arm. His deflector failed, the armor's weak point gave in and she took off his arm with a single force-enhanced swing. The backstroke sliced an angry glowing line in his chest. Unfortunately this time the armor held if barely enabling the Sith to jump back. For a moment, Shark T couldn't believe that it worked. She crippled him. She won. The pulsing ball of fury and corruption that was the dark side broke in an invisible explosion that sent T falling on her butt. The jarring impact made her scream in pain as her burned skin broke. When she found her footing, Vale appeared different. Shark T was sure he was looking at her curiously. To think that there would be a Jedi in this era who could match me, he said in wonder. It's over. Shark T said. Over? He looked down at his still smoking stump. It's such a pity things turned out this way, Master T. Vale nodded in respect. Stand down. This doesn't need to end in any more blood. T pleaded. No one else needed to die. Right? The Force shook as it screamed of the danger she was in. A crimson blur came from the darkness below the catwalk. Shark T acted on instinct and parried the spinning lightsaber. However, as she met that first attack, the Jedi Master knew it was too late. The next onslaught came into the form of a dark blur that splashed over her and covered the Jedi into the nauseating stench of the dark side. Her perception dulled and she knew that whatever Vale did was going to slow her down. Despite that, T managed to parry the following strike, which came from Rancis's levitated saber. As she battered the weapon away, Shark T managed to get a glimpse of her fellow Jedi Master. He was still alive, somehow, but wasn't long for this world. Rancisis was blissfully unconscious and unable to feel the dark side dissolving his flesh. Already almost half his chest was gone and the dark energy eating at him was far from done. Shark T didn't see the next attack coming. Vale was suddenly in front of her and he slammed his remaining hand into her gut. The sheer power behind that punch lifted her off her feet and the next thing T knew was the cold metal of the catwalk kissing her cheek. An armored boot kicked her lightsaber out of her hand, sending it flying into the ocean below. The Jedi lashed at Vale with the Force, yet her desperate attack slammed into and bounced off an unyielding barrier. A telekinetic grip closed around Shaak Ti and hoisted her into the air. "I owe you one, you know. You broke me out of my funk," Vale explained. "I can't let you go after the Jedi for whatever the Council did," Shaak Ti declared. "No matter what happened on Coruscant, the whole Order, no, the galaxy shouldn't pay for that mistake. You can't stop me either." Purple lighting slammed into Shaak Ti and she screamed as it ravaged her muscles, lit her nerves on fire and somehow tore the living force from her body. "Such a pity." Vale's voice came from very far away. "Don't worry, you aren't going to die here. I still have a use for you, my dear." Shaak Ti's darkening mid was momentarily taken aback by the almost gentle tone Vale spoke in. Then blissful darkness claimed her and there was no more pain. Twilight =RK equals Part 5. Flag Bridge. Corellian Cruiser Freedom. 1 light second from Kamino. Leaving hyperspace was swift and smooth. There was no physical sensation to mark the return to real space, yet Vale somehow knew. Even before the sensors could stretch and figure out what was around the fleet, Vale was already snapping orders and there was no trace of weakness or even weariness in his voice. "Enemy units to the starboard. Weapons flee. Full ahead 2/3, 20% up." However, Joanna had been around the Sith for long enough to still hear the anger barely kept at bay behind his words. She still wasn't sure if he told her the truth about his condition or if he lied for one reason or another. Holt believed that he had earned the benefit of the doubt, yet she simply couldn't help it but be wary of his motives. After all, Vale fought for a nation that wasn't his own. He had no bounds with the Republic, no people or home to protect. There were Mandalore and the Mandalorians, of course, his wife's people and now his own. However, that only meant that Vale was an ally of convenience at best. On the other hand, he was one of the most effective commanders the Republic had, and in these days that made him the closest thing to indispensable there was. The sensors finally refreshed the tactical plot, a few seconds slower than they should have, which meant the Admiral needed to have a quiet word with the captain so he could handle it. When the tactical situation became clear, two things were immediately apparent. Vale was right about the enemy ships that used to be to the starboard, two munificent squadrons which were turned to so much scrap by the warships on that side of the Republic formation even before the Freedom sensors could properly determine what was happening and put the information on the tactical display. The second thing was the situation at Kamino itself. The Republic defenses were breached at two places, and while GAR units were swarming over the enemy at those locations, the Sith were liberally pouring reinforcements into the gaps. The enemy was also hitting the defensive line hard in multiple places in order to either open new breaches or pin down the Republic forces. Primary Sith assault is in the vicinity of Tipoca City. Secondary is in orbital strike range of the planetary shield generator complex. One of the analysts on staff reported. "Get us to the gap above Tipoca and give me a line to whoever is in charge," Vale ordered. "Maintain formation. All ships are to maneuver independently within the formation. Fighters and bombers, stand by for launch. Comms to and from Kamino are being jammed," the resident communications officer reported. "Attempting to burn through the enemy ECM and establish a laser lock with GAR units at Kamino. The fleet is to go to full military thrust in 1 minute and move on the following vector. Be advised, Sith forces will attempt to intercept us shortly. Weapons are free, fire plan Aruj 7. The Sith continued to rattle orders. A frown crossed Joanna's face. That course change, was it merely a prudent precaution, simple paranoia, or could Vale anticipate where the Sith was going to come from thanks to the Force? The latter thought was unsettling. Quite likely too, considering what Holt had seen and felt him do. The minute passed and the fleet altered course while Joanna was busy examining the tactical situation. The GAR fleet at Kamino was still holding, a miracle in itself given the sheer amount of wreckage littering the inner system. All the debris and dead drifting hulls told a tale of an apocalyptic battle that had been raging for days, perhaps weeks. There were enough wrecks to account for whole normal-sized fleets, and that was just what was visible at a resolution showing the whole planet and everything larger than a bomber within 5 light-minute radius from Kamino. 10 seconds later, a Sith battle group exited hyperspace in a perfect position to intercept Freedom's fleet, before their course change. Now the enemy was suddenly in a position to got their faces struck by a full broadside from 2/3 of the fleet. The first hammer blow was more than enough to simply shatter the Sith's munificent frigates and recusant destroyers in range. By the time the enemy was able to retaliate, the Republic ships had concentrated their firepower upon the 3 battleships making the core of the Confederate formation. Freedom shattered their shields in a punishing display of firepower while her brood mission killed them in a short order. By the time the 2 formations were out of effective range, the Sith battle group was a drifting collection of helpless wrecks, while the Republic lost merely a handful of unlucky frigates. Vale rattled another course change, one that would bring them just above the enemy, throwing themselves at the gap above Tipoca City and allow the Freedom to gut them with near impunity until the Sith could bring heavy reinforcements to throw at Joanna's ship. "Sir, we've got a laser lock with the Nomad. They're patching us through," Commodore Tarkin, the acting fleet commander. A few seconds later a holographic image of a thin, tired-looking man appeared next to the tactical plot. Still, his ice-blue eyes shone with determination that was almost manic, an obvious sign that the maelstrom of destruction at Kamino hadn't dulled the man's spirit. "I'm Commodore Wilhuff Tarkin. Are there any more reinforcements coming?" He got straight to the point. "Negative, Commodore. We're it." Tarkin closed his eyes for a moment. "In that case, sir, what are your orders? I do not believe that we have the numbers to hold Kamino even if the Confederacy doesn't send any more ships our way. I'm sending you an update on the fleet's status." Vale paused and studied the tactical display where a window opened and began scrolling through damage and logistic reports. "We're plugging the gap above Tipoca. Order immediate evacuation of all Republic forces on Kamino while we still have the orbitals mostly covered. What's the status of General Rancisis and Admiral Cal?" "The Jedi's ship had to make a crash landing. The last I heard, he got to Tipoca. The Admiral went down when his flag was lost with all hands," Tarkin answered. "Sir, we're receiving Priority 1 message from Coruscant. It's on all military channels," the comm officer said in incredulous voice. "Put it up and calm down," Vale grumbled. Joanna looked at the Sith, who turned his head her way and gave her a small nod. A frozen ball formed in the pit of her stomach and she knew in her bones what the transmission was going to be about. 66. "I say again. Is Admiral Grad, acting Commander of all Gar-4. Coruscant. Jedi-led coup. Chancellor. Clean up that transmission." Joanna and Vale snapped at the same time. The transmission hissed like an angry lizard before the audio feed cleared up while the holographic image became grainy and much fuzzier. Identification 7-Delta-1099-Arubsh-31-92. Codewords, Exile, Purple, Black. Authenticating code. "It's the Chancellor's," Vale growled. Joanna closed her eyes as she heard Palpatine confirm that he had been mortally wounded by Jedi attempting to overthrow the government. The Chancellor's visual image was bad, yet clear enough to recognize his wounds. "Execute Order 66. This treason can't be left to succeed," Palpatine rasped. His body shook and he laid still. The recording finished only to be replaced by the familiar clone face of Admiral Graduate. "I confirm Jedi attacks upon the Senate, Gar HQ and Gar forces stationed at the Jedi Temple. All Gar units receiving this transmission, Order 66 is in effect. I say again, execute Contingency Order 66. Further, elements from Oni, Sid and the Cathar military took part in the coup attempt. A terror the likes of which Joanne didn't knew existed froze the blood within her veins. Her head snapped up to stare at Vale on its own volition, which nearly made Holt's heart stop. The Sith was surrounded by a swirling cloud of darkness that simply dissolved everything around him. Pieces of chairs and a significant chunk from the table by which the man stood simply disappeared as if they were never there. All Joanna could think then and there was that she was sharing a compartment with a devil from the deepest and darkest of all 9 Corellian hells. "Commodore Tarkin, inform our men on the ground that I'll be executing Order 66 myself. They're not to interfere. Make a call to our Jedi friends to meet me at the nearest secure landing pad to their current position. Their presence is mandatory. Be advised, all Gar assets and system are under Admiral Holt's command until I am back from the surface. General Vale, out." The Sith spoke with a voice laden with such intensity and power, that no one who heard him ever contemplating doing anything but obeying as fast as humanly possible. Joanna was just glad when the cloud around Vale dissipated and she could breathe again. == RK=. Part 6. Gar Assault Shuttle. above Tipoca City, Kamino. Huh. I've served the Sith Empire for 60 years. I've suffered grievous injuries. I'm pretty sure I've been clinically dead at least twice. Yet, today it was the first time someone was able to cut off one of my arms. And I felt like I should be thanking Shaak Ti for that. The sheer shock knocked the madness out of my mind, for the time being at least. I could still feel my fury claw at my mind. The need to tear apart the Jedi, to see my enemies drowning in their own blood, it was overwhelming, and this time I didn't particularly care. Even if I could, I wasn't inclined to put on another mask and become it like I did after Ashara was murdered. I wanted to revel in my vengeance. I needed to, even if I knew that letting my emotions rule me would get me killed even against this day's Jedi. T proved that much. I glanced at her body, which I dumped near the cockpit. She wasn't going to be awakened any time soon. The dark side whispered of bloodlust, of how sweet it would feel if I tore apart Shaak Ti, both body and mind. I was tempted too. In the end, the Jedi proved themselves my enemies and needed to be put down like the rabid dogs they were. If I hadn't wasted so much time playing nice and figuring out how to turn as many of them to my side peacefully, my wife might be whole right now. Alive. What the criff was I doing all this time? It wasn't like I particularly cared about the Republic. Nor the Jedi, yet, being part of an army with minimal political entanglements until I went to Mandalore, that was the closest I've felt to home, to being content ever since Ashara's death. I didn't want to rock the boat. Didn't want for things to change, to deal with politics any more than I absolutely had to. I'd gone soft and Bo paid the price. As a mere Republic general, even as Mandalore, when all was said and done, I was at the mercy of the Republic. Once upon a time, that very thought would have been infuriating. However, ever since I got my rank in the GAR, I didn't really care. Things were simple. I was just a soldier who had a war to fight. Just like the brief period back in the Empire between the time I got enough power to be relatively safe and the time I was neck deep in Sith politics. Before meeting Ashara, that was the best time in my life. Hey. What bloody criffing mess. What was I supposed to do now? Palpy was dead. I felt the bastard die. That was A+. The Jedi Order was broken and about to be hunted down like the rabid dogs they are, another plus. The Republic was decapitated, and from what I knew of the Senate, they were unlikely to elect someone who could effectively run the war or at least leave us to do it for them. Hell, without Palpy, his supporters were going to be fractured. Perhaps enough that I got the Senate on my case again, and that wasn't something I would allow. It wasn't like I've ever cared about democracy. I was back to the same question, what the criff should I do now? Ashe equals. Flag bridge. Corellian cruiser Freedom. High orbit above Kamino. By the time I was back on board the Freedom, I had some ideas on how to proceed. My two immediate issues were resolving the situation on Kamino and getting my body fixed one way or another. Given the time constraints, my best bet was to see if the machine that rebuilt my body last time was still operational. If not, I might need to use T's body as a spare, which would open a whole new can of worms. Admiral Holt and the people under her command might have issues with that idea, or even disbelief that I might be able to wear T's body like a spare set of clothes. The same goes for the clones under my command, not just the Corellians. Speaking about the clones, did Palpy had contingency orders for them in case he got himself killed? Even if he didn't, there were still too many of them to influence if they got lawful orders to go after me. Orders that might get issued by the Senate depending if my detractors could push such resolution through, because for all I knew, my allies on Coruscant were either gone or in no position to be of any help. I shelved those thoughts for later when I got to the flag bridge. There was a heavy guard in front of it, though they didn't do a thing to stop me. Inside I could see that most signs of my brief lapse of control were gone, though there still was a large chunk missing from a table. On the other hand, Joanna had 2 squads of heavily armed and armored Corpsec troopers posted around the compartment. It was like she didn't like me anymore, or was afraid if the way she flinched and the brief spike of terror coming from her the moment I entered were anything to go by. Joy. Sitrep, Admiral. I asked and looked at the tactical plot. Not good. The primary breach in the defense line was plugged by the Freedom and the rest of my fleet, though the other one had been reinforced by the enemy. The Sis had also pierced the defenses surrounding Kamino in 2 more places and were busy sending wave after wave of transports full with both droids and Old Republic Jedi of all things. In my fury I didn't really pay any attention to them while I was down there, though now I could get a vague sense of them. Most of those Force adepts felt strange. Fresh. There were a lot of them too. That clinched it. Even if I didn't have time constraints, holding Kamino would be very damned hard and expensive. As things stood, I was going to lose the place one way or another and likely get blamed for it unless I managed to shift the blame to the Jedi. Status of the evacuation? I interrupted Holt's report. It wasn't like I paid any attention to it, which just served to demonstrate that I needed some time off to get my head straight before I criffed up by the numbers once again. Less than 10%. We get 2 more courses for the shuttles and LARTs. Tell our people on the ground that that's how long we can hold the orbitals before suffering unacceptable casualties. Whoever is not on board in the next 30 minutes will be left behind. I heard Holt protest that we could hold on for at least a few more hours even if things really went to hell or something, though I was already tuning her out. When everything was said or done, the forces that I could count on right now were my Mandalorians, which were criffed up without Republic support which might not continue to be reliable for long, and my Special Operations Group. While every Republic piece of hardware, soldier and crewman in this system technically answered to me, the great majority of them owned their allegiance to either the Republic or Corellia. I had no doubt that only a fraction of the clones in system would follow me if whoever ended up running the Senate turned on me. Not to mention that Joanna was a smart girl, so she didn't really trust me outside my competence as a military leader. Considering that for all I knew, the Republic was going to hell, my situation was far from ideal. If I was lucky, my allies on Coruscant might be able to re-establish some measure on control and even keep the Senate from criffing up everything. I glanced at the stump where my right arm ended. I didn't feel particularly lucky today. I needed this fleet and the people in it behind my back without a knife ready to stick into it when I wasn't paying attention. I needed their allegiance bound to me personally, and that simply wasn't possible. It wasn't like even a Sith could turn a whole army against the people they were sworn to protect. But that wasn't entirely true, was it? One Sith did it centuries before my time. Revan. Malak V. A smile crept on my face. The idea was insane. If I criffed it up, which was the likely outcome, the Republic might very well turn into my enemy. Which for all I knew might soon be the case anyway. I closed my eyes and let the Force flow through me, ignoring the pain it caused. As far as I knew, Revan managed it without having access to battle meditation. This was going to be tricky. Not something I could let Joanna or anyone else see coming until it was too late. I wondered if someone had ever used battle meditation to betray and turn the forces under their command. Hey equals. The next round of transports just docked. Someone reported. Good. It was time. I felt Joanna and everyone on the flag bridge stiffen as my battle meditation touched them. The pain I felt increased with the strain brought by every new mind that became connected with my own, and once it was on the verge of overwhelming me, I dumped the sheer agony I felt in the Gestalt consciousness under my command. My will slammed into the minds of the clones down on Kamino, controlling the planetary and theater shields alike. I tore at them until they could comprehend a single thought: shut down the shields. This is General Vale to the fleet. Kamino is on the verge of being overrun by the enemy. We cannot allow vital war-related infrastructure and information to fall into separatist hands. Under my authority, execute wildfire protocols. I ordered the fleet, using the Force to reinforce my command, then returned my whole attention to the battle meditation. I concentrated on the soldiers across the fleet. They were good soldiers, and good soldiers follow orders. That was the thought I wanted to pass through their collective minds, and it did. Now it was time to see if my efforts were going to be enough. Good soldiers follow orders and we have ours. I pushed the thought until it was to the forefront of every single man and woman connected to me. I could feel Joanna's agreement, then horror as a part of her comprehended what was about to happen. She turned to look at me and opened her mouth to say something. I pushed for all I was worth and the Admiral stumbled. Then the first barrage was on its way to Kamino's undefended surface and the die was cast. Interlude. Darkness falls. There is a place in the galaxy where the dark side of the Force runs strong. It is something of the Sith, but it was fueled by war. It corrupts all that walks on its surface, drowns them in the power of the dark side. It corrupts all life, and it feeds on death. Kriya, KOTOR 2. Malak V. That was arguably Revan's greatest achievement. In a single stroke he ended the Mandalorian Wars. It was an event that echoed throughout the galaxy and was heard by those touched by the Force. The Mandalorians were broken in that battle. The Republic won. That's what everyone knows for sure of that battle. Then there are the rumors. Some say that Malaka V was a trap. That it was the moment when Revan showed his true colors and sacrificed those under his command who held their loyalties to the Republic and their homes in higher regard than their loyalty to Revan himself. They say that he used Malaka V to turn all but one of the Jedi who joined him to the dark side. Others believe that Malaka V was a freak incident of war. I've been above that broken world. I've walked across its ravaged plains. Even 400 years later I could still feel the screams of the dying. I could still sense their fear and taste echoes of their pain. There was no great revelation, no clue if Revan wrought that day was intentional or not. There was a great revelation. Even centuries later, Malaka V was different. I could sense it screaming at me through the Force. That planet was a place of death. It was covered by intangible oceans made by the dark side itself. When I was on the surface, I nearly drowned in the sheer corrupting power of contained on that wretched world. When I stood there and opened myself to the dark side, it drove me to the edge of madness. Malaka V left its mark upon my soul and made me understand that no matter what Revan intended to do upon that cursed world, it didn't matter in the end. A single act of war tore a wound in the Force itself. One that feeds on life and corrupt everything it touches. After seeing it for myself, I knew how Revan turned every single Jedi who followed him but the exile on his side. I knew why almost every soldier in the Republic army under his command chose to turn against the Republic. Until I stood above Kamino attempting to replicate Revan's feat, I wasn't sure how he did it. I just knew in my bones why he succeeded. Almost 1 billion died when the first barrage hit Kamino. A third of them were lucky. They had just an instant to begin feeling pain before the orbital bombardment turned them into ashes. Others were flash burned to death by the thermal impulse or torn apart by the shock waves and were lucky that their brains lacked sufficient time to register the agony. I felt their pain anyway. The Force echoed with their dying screams regardless. From men, women and children, to the tiniest microbe, I could sense their deaths. The oceans boiled, cities burned, and those on the edge of the orbital strikes wailed in agony as their skin melted or were boiled in the ocean which used to offer them protection. The tiny part of me that contained the tattered remains of my conscience recoiled by all that death I was responsible for. Most of me reveled in the power of death. The dark side shook with the influx of power my actions fed it with and ensured that I would love every moment of it. At the same time, every man and woman in my fleet screamed when the death of 1 billion people hit them like a sledgehammer. It was only the Gestalt making us all as one expanded mind that kept their minds from shattering. The second barrage hit. The third. Kamino screamed. The bombardment continued. Ships died when the Cis pressed their assault in order to try preserving their ground forces down on the planet. I fed the echoes of those deaths into the Gestalt, making my people experience them just as I made them feel everyone below us dying. Something tore in the Force and the dark side itself boiled upon Kamino's vaporizing oceans. Those few still alive down there within deep shielded bunkers had a moment to scream in desperation before their lives were consumed. A ripple went over Kamino and every single still living thing on the surface was snuffed out of existence. I felt the few enemy Jedi who hadn't managed to evacuate in time scream like damned souls when the dark side claimed them for its own. I could feel everyone bound to me recoil from what we just wreaked upon Kamino. I could feel their minds begin to fray under the strain of the dark side. I could sense their very sanity begin to shatter when every single one of them comprehended what it truly meant to murder a whole world. And I loved every single moment of it. Clones and natural-born alike screamed for respite. They needed for something, anything to take away the pain. It was their darkest hour and I was there to offer them succor when they needed it most. The dark side offers many gifts. It could mask many things. It often lies. Most importantly, it helps us in our darkest hour. It can help us believe the lie that the monster in the mirror isn't our distorted reflection. Its greatest gift is that it can hide us from ourselves. It can drown our pain and suffering in the screams of our victims. In our darkest hour it could offer us the succor we so desperately need. And the price is one that we would gladly pay. Pain, suffering, fear and despair, those are no longer things we should be wary of. They're nothing we need to fear, because from now on they're merely our instruments. I was what my people needed. I was the shoulder they cried on. I was the helping hand that dragged them back beyond the edge of madness. I was the one giving them the warm hug they craved and telling them that everything was going to be fine. I was the one who convinced them that they could live with the burden of murdering Kamino and every living thing upon that planet. I was the one who convinced them they weren't monsters in their own eyes. I am the one who damned them and they were grateful for it. I am the Dark Lord of the Sith and the dark side is my eager servant.